It is time for us to do some local history, and of course we do that with only one person, and that is Harold Peacock from historyouthere.com. If you haven't checked out his website, do yourself a favour, because there is a wealth of historical stories there that he has researched himself, and you can read them all, and it's a fantastic read, each and every one of them. So check it out, historyouthere.com, and he has yet another one all about Dalby. Good morning, Harold.
Yes, good morning, Dalby. 113th story from the Darling Downs.
Wow. Gee, we're racking them up, aren't we?
Yeah, that's right, because there's always something happening, especially in Dalby. And if you go back 112 years, there's even more happening. And that's what I'm going to tell you about today.
I know you've got a story about this Alderman, and we'll let you tell the story.
Yeah, that's right, an Alderman convicted of vagrancy, but we'll get to that. It was in 1914, and it was like a furor in the Dalby Council chambers, and it was caused by the mayor at the time, Mr. Walter Hunter. Now, he'd come from Tasmania and was an architect, pastoralist and auctioneer. And Hunter would actually serve 2 terms as Dalby mayor during 16 consecutive years on council.
Wow.
Now, he was doing all he could to throw the alderman, Joe McEwen, off council. It was just a furor in the chambers. Because McEwen, well, a little bit of background about McEwen, he'd been the first valuer appointed by the Railway Commissioner in the Dalby, Cattle Creek or Bell District. Twice he was elected an auditor of the Wombo Council, twice valuer for Dalby Council, and ultimately he would be elected as alderman on the Dalby Council 3 or 4 times. So he's really well known, high profile, but on this occasion it was a bit of a furor. Now, McEwen's brother Austin was always also a little bit causing a bit of trouble every now and again. He'd been an alderman on the Wombo Council after pulling out of a state election one time, complaining that the party he was in a shambles. I don't know whether that would apply today, but anyway, that brother would later escape criminal charges of false pretences, but lose a civil case that was related to it.
Right.
Anyway, look, stirring up all this McEwen trouble in council was a man with the suspiciously German-sounding name of Ludwig Walter Keischel. Now, he was actually born in Gassen.
Right.
And he was one of at least 11 children born to the even more German-sounding Wilhelmina and Gottlieb. Now, being of German descent was not a good situation in 1914, of course.
Right.
Because that was on the cusp of the First World War with Germany. So, Ludwig might have been having a little bit of trouble that way. But anyway, young Keischel, Ludwig Keischel, he was just 23 years old and was willing to stand up and take on the Dalby councillor. Now, Keischel took McEwen to the Dalby police court, alleging that McEwen had fraudulently represented that he would lodge an application for a block of land on Keichel's behalf. Now, the lodgement never happened, but McEwen still took the young man's money. Now, the amazing part is that the charge that McEwen faced came under the Vagrancy Act. Now, roars of laughter came from the public gallery when Keischel said that he regarded McEwen as a rogue and a vagabond and a no-good fellow, which was actually the meaning of the word vagrant in the Act.
Right.
It's the vagrancy charge. Anyway, McEwen was convicted of being a rogue and a vagrant and was fined a tidy sum of £17 and 15 shillings. He was now a criminal. And so the Dalby mayor then set about getting McEwen kicked off council. And this was even while McEwen was taking his appeal all the way to the Supreme Court of Queensland.
Wow.
So this is high profile. But that appeal it was to no avail because the appeal was rejected and the vagrancy conviction stood. And look, not long after, young Keischel, he actually enlisted in the Australian Army and fought his German cousins on the front line in France, all across the main battlefields, Amiens and Wallencourt, Villers-Bretonneux, and so on. And he was actually wounded in action when he was gassed during the 100 Days Offensive that actually helped end the war.
Right.
Now, Keischel, he returned home, and in 1920, he did get his land in the end because he was granted a land selection of 320 acres as a returning veteran. So he got that land in the end. But meanwhile, his nemesis, Dalby's Alderman McEwen, he managed to be re-elected to council another, 1 or 2 times. But McEwen remains, to this day, probably the only alderman in Australian history to be kicked off council after being convicted of vagrancy. And it can't happen ever again to anyone else. That's because vagrancy stopped being a crime in Queensland in 2005.
Right.
So there you go, Damo. Dalby has an Australian record, vagrancy for an Alderman, and that can never, ever be beaten.
There you go. And I'll tell you what, the argy-bargy and, backstabbing still going on councils. But anyway.
Yeah, that's right. But because the old advice was keep $5 in your pocket so you couldn't be arrested for vagrancy, it may well still stand if it wasn't for that repeal of legislation just 20 years ago. So it's fairly recent.
There you go, mate. I appreciate it. Now, of course, you'll be posting this story online.
Absolutely. I'm posting a story with some photos of the people involved, which is actually quite interesting. On my website, it's historyouthere.com.
There you go, historyouthere.com, mate. Thank you so much for that great story, and we'll look forward to catching up again next week.
Yeah, and all the best to Dalby Alderman today. There's no offence taken, I hope.
No offence at all. There he is, Harold Peacock, joining us there as we take a look back at local history. We're going to take a break and back with our birthdays.